Hello and welcome to There's No Business Like, a podcast where friends and industry colleagues explore topics and interview leaders in our industry of professional theatrical touring.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to There's No Business Like. I'm Katie Miller with Michigan Maven Creative Associates, and I'm here with my friends, Brian
Zellmer joining you today from Shahola, Pennsylvania.
Danielle.
Hey, it's Danielle Van Hook from the Alden in McLean, Virginia.
Josh.
Hey, Josh Benson, rocking it from Marion, Illinois, at the Marion Cultural and Civic Center.
And Kevin.
Kevin Maynard coming at you from Tallahassee with opening nights at Florida State University.
Awesome. Well, this week we have a great conversation with industry legend Lenore Naxon. Before we get to that, though, Lenore is going to tell us a story about getting an extra pot of money at a venue that she was at and being able to book some extra talent for her season, it's a great story. So my question for you all is, if you got a magical extra pot of money to book extra artists for your season, what four artists would you book with this magical pot of money? Dream artists.
Katie, I'm going to answer your question by not answering your question. And I dream all the time about what I would do with random extra money. So this is a very easy question for me to answer. I think a lot about, like, as presenters, like all of the things that we do beside presenting as well. And I'm assuming that I'm allowed to use my imagination and tap into that side of my job as well.
Go for
and
it.
Here's the thing. I'm commissioning so much new work in the young audiences space. I'm going to be premiering new work like twice a year for the next 5 years. I'm about to bless a lot of new works coming at the stage.
I love that.
If I do have to program one, though, I really want to hear Adele in my space. But I think I might need 2 pots of money for that.
I love that. I love that creativity.
So anybody out there listening would like to give me specifically a pot of money, that specific amount, I am ready.
Awesome. Kevin, what about you?
To be honest, I'm sort of in that position right now. I mean, with moving from Quad City Arts to Florida State, I'm having this very similar conversation with myself of where I'm switching the way I'm programming. So it's kind of exciting. So it's hard to say for me right now, but I will say I do have one artist that's been on my bucket list for years, and she only goes out to a couple dates, and it's been a few years, but I would love to book me some Carol Burnett. If I could lock that one in with this magical pot of money, that's what I would do. And then if with this infinite amount of money, for my friend Danielle, I would book Taylor Swift just for her. It'd be just a private solo concert for Danielle. So
no, I want the whole experience.
Oh, okay. Well, then we're everybody free community concert. Danielle's up front. So
awesome. Josh.
I'm similar to Kevin, as in over the past few years, I've been given kind of carte blanche. Our budget changed from $75,000 a year to $750,000 a year for booking. Ooh. And that's an open-ended booking budget that I can go over it as long as I have the ticket sales to balance. And so I'm kind of in that situation, but restricted by house size. And so if I'm not thinking about house size, then I'm looking at Paul McCartney all day.
Oh, good call, man.
Love it. Okay. Brian, what about you?
Everyone else is mentioning A-list celebrities, so I'm going to go a different direction. Katie, I know you said, 4 artists, but like everyone else, I'm not going to follow that parameter either. Instead, I'm going to use that pot of money to present a series of community festivals using that money to support a myriad of artists, all covering all different genres and styles, and going to have special attention focused on new and upcoming artists, as well as supporting new works by seasoned artists. That's how I'd use the money.
Okay, I would, if I had a magical pot of money, I would make a legendary women series. And there's so many women floating around.
I'm available.
Danielle's going to headline. And then her backup singers are going to be, no, I'm just kidding. These are the 4 women that came to, I had a longer list than this, but if I had to narrow it down to 4, I would say Bonnie Raitt, Carole King, Audra McDonald, and then I'd toss in Michelle Doran-Stantz, because I've always wanted to book Michelle Doran-Stantz because she is freaking amazing and the company's amazing. But that's just not something that has ever been possible at the venues I've been at.
Can't believe Beyonce didn't make that list. Oh, rough.
Oh yeah,
I know. I would love some.
I can't believe
Bonnie,
how much I
Carol,
limited
Audra,
myself.
and Michelle. So, all right. Well, thanks for playing my little game with me, friends. I cannot wait for you to hear my conversation with Lenore Naxon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lenore Naxon. I'm currently a consultant helping nonprofit arts organizations and independent artists, giving them the tools they need to succeed.
Well, Lenore, welcome to There's No Business Like. I am so excited to have you on the show today. This interview is a long time coming. And so the listeners know Lenore and I have known each other for it's been more than about 8 years now. And we are connected through the Presenters Consortium network. So there is, as our listeners know, there's a network of presenter consortiums which support presenting organizations, agents, and artists around the country. And so when I became the president of the Michigan Presenters Network, I was looking for institutional knowledge. How am I going to do this? What are other organizations doing? Reached out to Lenore, and that is how our relationship started. We're going to dig into more of your work with California Presenters Network and that sort of thing as we go through. But I'm really excited to have you here today.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, Katie.
Well, let's just start with your origin story. So can you tell us what was your inspiration? What was your first sort of like big moment in the arts that made you want to do this work? And then how did you get to where you are today?
Okie dokie. So I'm the youngest of 3 sisters. I'm from Chicago.
If you couldn't tell by my accent.
And my elder 2 sisters spent their summers at Interlaken. My sister Jewel played the piano, and my sister Eileen was a dancer. I became 8 years old, and it was my turn, and I wanted to go, and I went. And so I was there every summer for 7 summers, and I did a lot of different kinds of things. I played the clarinet, I played the piano, I studied dance, I studied voice, I did choir, I did operetta, I did a whole variety of things. And part of it was that I loved the ambiance. I loved the environment because so many kids grow up in a place where the cool cats are all the jocks. The kids in the arts are the dorks. But here was everybody who was a musician, an artist, a performer, a dancer, a writer. I felt like I belonged there. So I was at home, I was taking all different kinds of lessons, and I was in high school plays, and I was also part of the Teen Footlighters at the Bernard Horowitz Jewish Community Center, and I was active there, and I had leads in a couple plays, but I will tell you, I wasn't very good. And when I went to Syracuse University to get my degree in theater, what the hell are they going to do with me? She's not a director. She's not an actor. She understands tech. Well, I was a stage manager. Because I didn't have the kind of talent, I say now, or direction to be a director or to be an actor, the chair of the department, who didn't really know me, suggested that I take a job working in the box office. And that was the box office for the Regent Theater, and it was Syracuse Rep, now called Syracuse Stage, and all the shows from the drama department. And I had a blast doing that because I was selling tickets and I was talking about shows and I was interacting with people. And then it came time for me to graduate, and I thought, oh, what am I going to do now? Well, how about if I take a master's in arts administration? At that time, there weren't many programs. And I applied to the program at Yale, as did most of the kids that were in my Syracuse drama department. They went to get masters mostly in acting and directing. Nobody got into Yale. And there was a program at UCLA, and there was one at SMU that was starting up. What the hell? I applied to them, and I got accepted at SMU with a scholarship. So I spent 2 years getting my master's in arts administration at SMU. But the program was so fluid that I could kind of chart my own course. The best class that I took was the graphics of communication, which was how to work with a printer. This was all pre-computers.
Very practical. I mean,
yeah, this is all, how to proofread, how to use proofreading marks, all that kind of stuff, different kinds of printing processes. It was awesome. And this was all pre-computers. I created an internship program there because I needed to get out into the community. And so I did an internship at Theater 3, which is a small Lord theater there. I did an internship at the Dallas Opera. And then the Dallas Opera got me the first management fellowship from the National Opera Institute. So I got to stay in Dallas at the opera company. Dallas is, in those days, is a really interesting company because it had world-class talent. It was perceived as a regional company. But, we're talking about Joan Sutherland and Richard Bonning, and we're talking about Maria Callas. We're talking about great, great artists. And I got to learn there.
Amazing.
Yeah.
I
And
didn't realize that you had this significant background in opera.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then there was a change in leadership there. So I freelanced around town, and then I applied for a job at the San Francisco Opera and got it. And so I moved to San Francisco and worked for the San Francisco Opera, which was extraordinary. To see the community embracing opera in a way I'd never seen in Texas. Now, mind you, I grew up going to the Lyric with my parents. I have to say that my parents, God love them, they took me to the Lyric Opera, and they took me to Theater Guild, to all the Broadway shows that were touring. And so I had it in my guts, that I loved it so much. But those years at the San Francisco Opera were extraordinary. Someone was saying someplace on Facebook the other day, what are your arts theatrical moments? And I can say that one is Otello when Placido Domingo walks on the stage and sings Vittoria. Or because I was a publicist and I got to walk around backstage, there was an extraordinary production of Turandot with Luciano Pavarotti and Montserrat Caballé. And I got to walk backstage and listen to the chorus of that Puccini masterpiece. And I got chills. I knew that was where I needed to be.
Working with San Francisco Opera, how do you go from there into being a consultant now in the field?
Oh, well, that's another long story. There again, like in Dallas, was change of management. And Mr. Adler was retiring, and we were producing the American premiere of Erja Beraiman's Lear, about the King Lear story. And I adored Mr. Adler for so many reasons. And he used to call me Cordelia because I was the loyal one. And what happened was that his successor, Terry McEwen, wrote me a letter and said, "You're done, don't come back." So that's how I left. And I started producing events and doing freelance projects around San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And then I met my husband and got married. And I was either doing high-level consulting or I was temping. And I met my husband, we got married, had our daughter. I realized that I hadn't pre-registered her at the best preschool in town, which was at the JCC. So I had a contact through a friend of a cousin, one of those things, and I called the president of the board, and I said, "Toby, if you get Alana into the preschool, you'll have my soul for life." So she got into the preschool. I started doing volunteer projects there. And lo and behold, I started working there, and I was there 20 years. We built a new facility. The other one was state-of-the-art 1932. They said to me, "We want you to be the director of development for this capital campaign." And I said, "Oh, Lana." And they said, "Well, I'll tell you what, if you do that, then you can create the performing arts program." And I did the old, would I, what are you going to do? Yeah. So we raised $85 million. We built the new building. I got to work on what the public spaces would look like. Mm-hmm. And I got to work with about all the things that the theater would be capable of. We moved in 2004. The fitness center, which is the core key business of any JCC, was incredibly successful. And they had so much money. They blasted through their strategic plan, their 3-year strategic plan in 18 months. And they had so much money that they came to me and they said, "We may have the best preschool in town, we may have the best fitness school in town, but that's not going to give us community and media visibility, but your program will." Mm-hmm. So they gave me an extra $90,000 the next year to spend on artists. So I went, okay. I hired Randy Newman. I hired Mandy Patinkin, I hired Roseanne Barr, and I can't even remember who the fourth one was. So, and then we started filling houses. Mm-hmm. And then the perception of the arts program changed. And then we brought in a colleague, and it became Arts and Ideas. So it was a lecture and conversation series in addition to all this. I was at the JCC through 5 different EDs.
It's a lot of change to manage.
They took away my staff. I had run a staff of 12, and it was just me and another curator. If I had been a smart person, I would have said, "Screw you, I'm going." But I didn't because I loved the work so much. Right. As happened, I started getting headaches. My husband said, "You're going to a neurologist." And I went to a neurologist who scanned my brain and said, "Something there, but you probably had it since childhood, and maybe you were born with it, and it's in your brainstem, and we don't touch it anyway. But just for the hell of it, come back in 6 months, and we'll do a scan with contrast. And I went in on a Monday, and I had a scan. The neurologist called me at 4 o'clock and said, get to the ER. And I said, I can't. I'm presenting Leslie Stahl tonight. And she said, Lenore, get to the ER. So it turns out that I had an aneurysm and I had an AVM, arterial venous malformation. I was very lucky that I, through a variety of circumstances, found a doctor at UCSF who specialized in these things. I had them both removed. I had the aneurysm was clipped and the AVM was removed. And so this happened in March. I managed to still be the present president at the California Presenters Conference in May.
Wow, that's a really quick turnaround.
It was a really quick turnaround, yes. Yes. And then I thought, well, I'm certainly not going back to the JCC. So I thought, well, let's consult. So I went to a party of some colleagues, and I met a man that I had known for years casually who lives in Amsterdam. He had a program called Kunst in Israel, and it was all about bringing performers, artists, speakers from Israel to Amsterdam, into the Netherlands. I told him I was hanging out my shingle, and he said, I'm your first client. So my first client was international.
Wow.
And then I had a woman that I knew from the JCC who was a donor in arts and disabilities. And she's also a voiceover artist. And so she had me build her website, oversee and put together the policies for her philanthropic giving. And she was my second client. And it kind of took off from there.
Wow. So let's talk a little bit about the other areas of the industry that you've been involved in. So you have a background in opera, you've been a presenter, you've done consulting on and off, but there are other things that you've done as a part of the field too. So one of those things is California Presenters Network, which we'll talk about. What are the other areas of the industry where you've served as well?
The current bulk of my consulting is with Temple Emmanuel, which is the largest Reform synagogue in Northern California, 2,000 families.
Wow.
5 rabbis, 2 cantors. High Holidays has 15 musicians, 2 sets of services, 5 venues, 5 audio techs, and a 3-camera live stream shoot. Got involved in live stream, not as a director, but as a producer. In my consulting work, I've done more work with arts and disabilities. I found that I'm a problem solver. There's an organization in San Francisco called Intersection for the Arts, and it's an incubator for independent artists and projects, and they're also a fiscal agent. I started doing those kinds of projects. I started doing a workshop called Are You Ready? And it was all for independent artists. How do you know that you're ready to tour? Is your website ready? How does your rider look? Do you have all the media? Do you have all your social contacts out? How do you go to conferences to meet people? So I did that How Are You Ready thing. And I did that at Arts Northwest, and I did it for the Nevada Arts Council. And then COVID hit. Everybody was sitting at home. And I knew that a lot of the artists at Intersection that were sponsored by Intersection were also sitting home because everybody was sitting home. So I called up Intersection and I said, I want to offer my services to do pro bono sessions with independent artists called How's Your Site, SITE, to have them improve their websites. I did about 6 or 8 or 10 of them, and that was great. And then other people heard about it, and then I got gigs helping people fix their websites. As I got more in my consulting work involved with boards of directors, it's really bad for people to ask me to be on a board because I've managed and coordinated boards for my entire career, and I make a lousy volunteer. I started a workshop that's all about how boards are changing because since BC, before COVID, the world has changed. We had COVID, we had George Floyd, we had Black Lives Matter, and then we had a technological revolution where we used to believe that technology is our friend, but in the live arts business, technology is our challenge because our main focus is getting people up off the couch and into the right. So it's how do we look at all that and have the same old boards we had 10, 15, 20 years ago.
So can we dive into that for a second? Can you give us like the mini lesson? So, you know, I think a lot of particularly folks that are newer to the field haven't had a chance or are trying to figure out how to manage boards. So give us the rundown. How did nonprofit arts boards used to function, and how do we need them to function now?
Wow, that's a great question. A lot of them used to be rubber stamp, and they had a required board donation for the year. Very often they were just the CFO of an organization and the ED of an organization would create an agenda for a monthly meeting or a quarterly meeting, and they would give it to the treasurer and the president to read. So it wasn't really participatory. Now we're finding that we can't have boards that are all a bunch of old white men anymore. There have to be women in leadership. They have to have people of color in leadership. From my perspective, I want all boards that I work with to have contracts. Every individual says how much they're going to give, what their priorities are, what they can do for the organization. They understand their ambassadorial roles, which can be as important as giving money. And they need to understand the potential for doing work in the organization if the organization doesn't have enough internal capacity in terms of staff to do it themselves.
So what's the difference between governance board and a working board for those that might be newer to the field? What's the difference between those two things, and when is one appropriate and when is the other appropriate?
I think it has to do with the age and sophistication of the organization. I did one of the other things I've done in my consulting is I've done 4 searches for directors of development of arts organizations. And I was asked to do one for Opera Parallel, which is a small opera company in San Francisco that does only contemporary work in innovative stagings. I was asked by the president of the board, who was a colleague of mine from San Francisco Opera. That was a young company that was just starting out. He was the one who was running the search, not the ED. He was the one that provided executive leadership because they couldn't. I think the governance is always there, but people who join boards need to understand that legally they have a fiduciary responsibility so that they have to look at the finances of the board, of the institution overall, and they have to look at the revenue streams and all the institutional fund development issues, and they have to look at to make sure that it's right. They also have to hire and fire the ED. Those things are true from the outset, but when you're a young board, or I say a new board just starting out, you have to understand these things moving into it. And as an organization grows in size and grows in sophistication, there's more understanding of governance and what that really means.
So I'm fascinated by this idea of a board contract. And I think it's brilliant to define that and put it on paper, because you can be asked to join a board and not really clearly understand what that means or what the expectations are. And I think, like you said, we are actively working to diversify our boards to better reflect the communities that we're serving. But within that comes its own challenges because, as you mentioned, this like a fiduciary commitment, right? A gift to the organization has always sort of been standard expectation of board members. But as we look at bringing in people of different generations and backgrounds and folks, across with just different levels of experience and expertise and things like that, a large financial gift is not always feasible or possible for the folks that could potentially bring other talents and gifts to the table as well. So what do you think about that, first laying out these sort of expectations, one of them being a financial gift?
I always say in the contracts that I write, 2 things. One, a gift that's important to you is important to us, which has its own intrinsic kind of definition. And the other thing that is that we don't want someone on the board who's on every board in town. So your gift to XYZ company has to be one of the 2 major philanthropic gifts you give every year. If you have people who have been on boards for years and years and years and people who are major donors, you kick them upstairs. You create an honorary board. You create a board of advisors and leave the work of the board, the day-to-day work of the board, to your board of directors. But at the same time, you keep the affiliation. You keep, in Yiddish we say kuvod, which means honor and respect by the affiliation. I know that when I was the director of development of the Jewish Community Center of San Francisco, the very, very gifted fundraiser executive director went to the 6th top Jewish philanthropists in the Bay Area and said, I'm not going to take this job and have this campaign unless I have commitments from all of you. And so we're talking Levi Strauss family, we're talking about Osher, we're talking about the Correct Foundation, we're talking about some big names. He got all of those people to give gifts so that the campaign started out with a great bang, and he created the Capital Campaign Advisory Committee. The other person on that committee was Senator Feinstein, because she was part of our community as well. So it was a way of keeping the affiliation with the big names that, by the way, we could call if we really needed something.
So there's ways to engage people in kind of multiple spaces, whether advisory capacity or working board capacity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There should be people on your board who can call up a mayor, a state representative, a district attorney, and invite them to a show, much less the head of corporate giving for XYD foundation or corporation, and have them come to a show. So they provide an ambassadorial responsibility that far exceeds anything that one or two individuals might be able to afford on a regular basis.
Right. What do you think the interaction between a board of directors and the staff of a nonprofit arts organization should be?
The direct line, I believe, is with the ED and the CFO. And then the rest of it is, if you have someone on your board who's got young kids, say, would you host a class of kids to come to XYZ performance on Sunday morning? There's, in many places, committees. Program committees are really an interesting thing. I have a friend and a client who I work with on one of the most cherished projects that I've ever done in my career. She was, for several years, the director of Stern Grove, which is an outdoor free festival. It was started by the Levi Strauss family, and it's in a grove in San Francisco, and it's natural air conditioning, and they do 10 free shows a year in the summertime. And she had a program committee. They did 10 concerts a year. She would bring a list of 12 things that she loved and she wanted to do, and they would choose the 10 because she didn't want to give up, nor should she have given up the artistic control, because there are all the factors that lay people don't understand.
Right.
In my own situation, I had a program committee when I was at the JCC. I had gone, they were more than the program. They were doing all the ambassadorial stuff with me. And they were a sounding board. So I'd gone to APAP, and I had seen the Harlem Gospel Choir. I love gospel. It gets me in my kishkas. I love it. And I came back. I said to the committee, I saw the Harlem Gospel Choir, but I don't know if I can present them here. Somebody on the committee said, why not? Yes, we're a Jewish institution, but there's a wall in the atrium that's called the Sheva Midot, which means the 7 principles. And one of them says, not by fire, not by sword, but by my spirit. And another one says, let your house be open wide. And these are 7 principles that are all part of Jewish tradition. I could justify a lot of things based on that. I went back and I booked the Harlem Gospel Choir. Because I'm a bit of a rebel, I did it as a Friday night Shabbat concert.
Oh, wow.
And I was the director of the Friend Center for the Arts, and I went to Donnie Friend, and I said, can I do this on a Friday night, on Shabbat? And he said, look, Lenore, you're not really competing with the synagogues. If people aren't going to synagogue for Friday night services, I'd rather have them be in a Jewish place. So I presented the Harlem Gospel Choir. Wouldn't you know that Donnie Friend's brother Bob was the first person to buy tickets? And then the thing sold out with my donors and board members and everybody else. So it was a lesson that my committee could come back to me and second an idea that I had and validate it for me, and that it would be successful.
Yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. In my time in the field, we've had back and forth conversations about involving community in programming discussions, how to get their feedback in a way that makes sense, taking in all those factors, that lay people don't necessarily know about into consideration. You're talking budgets and tech and routing and touring, all of those things. So it's interesting and cool to hear a story where that actually works.
Absolutely.
And it's a strong relationship, and you get the validation you need from your community that the programming has teeth or has legs, right? And will actually work.
Right.
That's really great.
On the other hand, I have been forced into programming by donors.
Yes. I know other colleagues that have as well.
And I remember standing outside of the room, literally banging my head against the wall because I was so embarrassed. I hope there are more good stories than bad stories.
Yeah.
I
think it's definitely a balance, and you have to invite the right people into that conversation, right? And there's a lot of factors that go into that. So interesting.
Yeah. I had one situation, just one more because it's kind of humorous. There was an ethnomusicologist who was Jewish, and he was coming to do an evening with the great Theodore Bickel and his wife, Tamara. It was very loosely structured. Theo would do 20 minutes, Michael would do 20 minutes, we'd have an intermission, then they would all come back. So Theo did his 20 minutes, and Michael goes on to do his 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes. He's just wandering, and I don't know what to do. I go to Theo Bickel, and I said to him, Theo, what should I do? Michael won't get off the stage. And he said, turn the house lights up. So I did, and Michael goes, oh, I guess it's intermission. I love that story.
That's amazing. I love that. Let's switch gears a little bit. So I want to talk about your involvement with presenter consortiums. So because you have an incredible history with presenter consortiums, and that's, like I said before, how we know each other. So you are the president of California Presenters, and then kind of have been chairing a national network of these presenters consortiums for many years now. So give me the brief rundown of how you became the president of California Presenters, and then let's talk about the PLC group.
I became president of California Presenters because I was the vice president, and there was a guy who was the president who left the state. And he called me and he said, do you want to do this? And I said, sure. So that's basically how I became president. And so I became president there, and I loved it. I loved one of the things I did there that I was most proud of. California is a really big state.
Yeah. And it's the biggest consortium of presenters in the country.
Right. Because one of the reasons is that our programming was so good that the northernmost boundary of California was British Columbia. So we had members from British Columbia, from Washington, from Oregon, from Arizona, from New Mexico, and even the woman who ran the program at Central Park in New York became a member for a year because she came as a speaker once and she loved it so much. The rationale for the creation of a consortium all had to do with routing, right? Initially, 40 years ago, it had to do with how do you get someone to tour to the West Coast? And you have to create a route of possibilities for people. And our programming became very robust. I was very proud because historically we were LA-centric, and I wanted the Bay Area market to be represented. So I took it upon myself to go to all the small presenter venues in the Bay Area and asked them to become members, and they became members and became active. This was all BC before COVID. And so I was very, very proud of that. And the thing I'm most proud of from my work at California Presenters was we had developed a relationship with the Blessed Hewlett Foundation, and they gave us annual funding. They sunsetted that aspect of things. But I went to them and I said, I want to bring Capacity Interactive out to a workshop on digital arts marketing. This is how much it's going to cost. We have to pay for people's housing and their travel. And so I'd like some money for scholarship. Capacity Interactive came out for 2 days. They sent 2 consultants out. One was storytelling, and the other was how to use Google Analytics. And I had 32 people from all over that came to it. I'm very, very proud of that because it was a reach for the organization to do it, but I had the time to do it, and I had the time and the relationship with Emiko Ono at the Hewlett Foundation. Parenthetically, the guy who was in charge of digital marketing at the Hewlett Foundation had just reached out to Capacity Interactive about something else, and so he knew them, knew of their brilliance.
Timing.
Yeah, and so the timing was really great. Yeah. But that's something I'm really proud of.
Well, and those are the sorts of professional development opportunities that serve presenting organizations in ways that, you can't really do maybe at a national conference, right? Or organizations can't really afford to do on their own. There's impact in that collective action, right?
Absolutely.
Or that, folks coming together statewide or regionally to really focus on the issues that they face, because we are such a large country and some of our states are so big that we really do have different issues in different regions in different parts of the country. What we're dealing with in Michigan is way different than what your California presenters are dealing with. So to be able to have sort of that microcosm and really be able to bring people together around the issues you face as a statewide or regional community is really special and really necessary.
It's been a revelation, and I'm constantly suggesting to people that they register with Capacity Interactive for something they call News You Can Use. They have a CTA generator on it, call to action generator. Yeah. They also have a wonderful podcast called CI2EYE, and then they do intensive in New York City in the fall. And I highly recommend them for everybody.
Yeah. No, they have great resources. I love their podcast too. I'm a regular listener, particularly if marketing is not your forte or it's something that gets tacked onto your job. If you're in a small organization, they are data driven. They have great insight. They bring in really interesting speakers from different parts of the field. So yeah, just a little shout out to our friends over at Capacity Interactive.
Yeah, one of the things, because when we're all housebound during the pandemic, I remember they had done a study about the reasons that people come to performances. During the lockdown, and as if things were emerging, they were looking historically, and they found out that more than PR, more than paid advertising, more than digital advertising, more than any kind of marketing promotion, word of mouth was number one.
I believe it.
And that was a revelation to me.
But having the data to back it up
absolutely
is important. And you can sometimes learn those things that you didn't expect through that. And so having organizations that can do that and do that well and in scientific way, so we all are working off the same information, is super important.
Okay, good.
So I just mentioned actually collective impact model and sort of the differences regionally with our presenting consortiums, but also our experience shows that we also face a lot of the same issues as well. Right. And so let's talk a little bit about your work in bringing all of these consortiums together over the course of time. So
where did
that start, and how has it changed?
Presenters used to meet once a year at APAP during noon on Friday or Saturday, and we'd sit around for an hour and discuss things. And there was a guy named Hank Nair, Knerr, who was the chair of this, and he was the head of Pennsylvania presenters. And we had a listserv, a Google list, and he reached out and he said, I'm looking for a co-chair. I said, I'll do it. East Coast, West Coast, fine things. So Hank retires, and I become the chair. And then COVID happens. Katie, sitting with you, Katie reaches out to me and said, will you speak at Michigan Presenters? And I said, but I'm not the president of California Presenters anymore. And you said, doesn't matter. You know everything you need to, And so I don't even remember what I talked about.
I think we brought you in to talk about organizational resilience, sort of in the face of challenges. And then how do we work together within the consortium, right? To support each other.
Exactly. Thank you. I did that, and I thought it was well received. And so then I reached out to you and I said, do you think that the presenters consortium, the leadership consortium, would like to get together? So we decided to ask them. So we put out an email and said, would you guys like to meet? And they all said, hell yes, because we were all dealing with no revenue streams and how to live stream it, how to monetize it, and cancellation clauses and force majeure and cleaning and masking, all that kind of stuff. So we started having these monthly meetings. And then we were talking about multi-generational leadership. I was all in favor of it, and then I kind of went and said, I better talk the talk and walk the walk. So I asked you, Katie, if you would be my co-chair. And so I would say that once a month, the first Friday of every month, we meet. You and I put an agenda together. We have 68 people on our list now.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah. So which is made up of the presidents and VPs of kind of the regional and statewide consortiums. They're on our listserv.
Right. And a couple of paid execs, right? Yeah. We put an agenda together and we get between, I would say, 18 and 24 people. Yeah. We started talking about that kind of stuff. And then George Floyd happened. And we started talking about DEI or DEI-AB, accessibility and belonging on the end, and who the best consultants are. And then you did this awesome thing where you started creating Google Docs that had resources in them. So who are the best DEI consultants? Who do you talked about cleaning equipment? What are some sources for how to write a cancellation clause? What are some of the other Google Docs we have?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just PD in general. So as the consortiums are going through and doing their own conferences, we populate with like, who were your speakers? How did it go? What's their contact information? Because as busy leaders in our own organizations and then serving on consortium boards, like a lot of that, most of that is volunteer work. And so being able to share resources and recommend other resources, PD speakers, ideas for kind of like how to manage your consortium has been incredibly valuable, because we need, as the volunteer leaders of these organizations, we need the support too. And that knowledge sharing, especially when new folks are rolling on to consortium boards, it really helps kind of speed up the acclimation process.
Right. And I think the last year, the topic of conversation has been about work-life balance and wellness, and how do we support the member organizations,
right? As they're figuring out how to support them. Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I know that we've had this conversation many times, but having a space where people that are running similar organizations, but in that volunteer capacity, can come and share their challenges, share their successes as well, and commiserate, you know, when times are hard. Really has been helpful and has, I think, built some incredible relationships, and I think strengthened the consortiums and the work that they do in supporting their members, which is, you know, sort of at the end of the day, what it was originally built for. And we support each other as individuals, but I think that then ripples out in terms of then consortiums be able to better support their members, which just strengthens the presenting side of the field. And there are agents and artists that are part of consortiums as well, but presenters hold a specific place in the field, and having those resources and connections is really important.
I remember when we first started during the pandemic, the PLC meetings. Larry Cosson was the president of Pennsylvania Presenters. He's an agent. It brought a total different perspective. Mm-hmm. I think one of the blessings, if you can call it that, of the pandemic is that where there was always in the past a combative and confrontive kind of relationship between presenters and agents, now it's more collaborative. Mm-hmm. And people get along better, you know, and they understand each other, because if we were suffering when we couldn't gather, they were suffering worse.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that is one of the silver linings to come out of that very dark period.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how that is shifting and changing, and how some people are still embracing that. Some folks are going like back to the status quo because that's what's comfortable, right? So I feel like we're still in that transition moment.
Well, change is hard.
Change is hard.
But I often say the only thing that's constant is change. If you're not learning and you're not growing and you're not changing, get out of town. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Okay, so 2 more questions. So you've been in the field and in many different capacities for a long time. I value that because you have a long view of how things have changed, developed, grown. And you just said the only constant is change. So thinking back sort of over the span of your career, what is maybe the one thing that you would look to or pinpoint as the thing that has changed the most? And what is your hope for the future of our industry?
Oh, I think I have a list. I think it's more than one thing. I think if
you could pick one.
Well, yeah, there are 2 of them that are next to each other.
Okay.
One is Black Lives Matter, be a racial reckoning. The other thing is technology, because it didn't exist. You know, the things, digital, social, online, all that, it didn't exist. It didn't exist. And that's been huge. Mm-hmm. That's been huge. And similarly, you look at what people are presenting and their responsibility and their response to the community surrounding them. And that's been huge. It's still evolving. I was looking at LinkedIn and I got the announcement. God bless them. The National Endowment for the Arts has just put out an RFP for a director of native arts.
I saw that.
And I thought, well, isn't it about time? And bravo. Mm-hmm. I mean, that, you know, that would never have happened. Right. Andre having his great success with building a roster of indigenous artists.
Oh, Andre Bouchard, yeah.
Yeah. And I know he was brilliant on this podcast, you know, and I go up to him and say, how you doing? And he said, I have 10 tours out.
It's incredible.
And that's change. And that's awesome.
That's wonderful. Okay. So, you know, we have a time machine. Brian somehow got us this time machine. So you and I are going to hop in the time machine, and I want to go back in time to when you were starting your career in opera in Dallas. So it kind of feels like the start of your real work.
Yeah.
So what do you know now that you wish you had known then?
It's never one thing, but I would say that I didn't understand then how imperative a commitment to excellence was. It's something I learned from my mentor, the great Kurt Adler at the San Francisco Opera, the impresario, and I have a photograph of him over my desk with his finger, his gnarled, arthritic old finger in the air, and he, in my mind, he's looking down at me and saying, "Sloppy." And I go, "Okay, Mr. A, I'll redo it. It'll be better."
Lenore, it has been such a pleasure to sit down with you. I am personally just so grateful for our personal and professional relationship. You have given me so many opportunities and helped me grow as a professional in this field. And I'm so glad you said yes, and we were able to sit down and chat today.
Thank you very much. I listen to the podcast every single week.
Lenore's our biggest fan, and we appreciate that so much.
Thank you.
Katie, I know how long you have been waiting to interview Lenore, and I know that the stars aligned and you all were able to do it recently. This conversation is everything I hoped that it would be, and more. But like the thing that I kept going back to and listening to was all of the things that she kept sharing about boards, because I think, especially to a lot of people, to me, boards are kind of ambiguous. There's a lot of big picture things the boards say that they do, but like the day-to-day of it, I'm not sure that a lot of people really understand, and especially people outside of our industry that often get tapped for these boards. And like, what does it mean to serve on a board? What is it like? What are X, Y, and Z, the things that you are signing up and saying you're going to do? And then, other duties as assigned. I think a lot of people do it for clout, right? And I think that this contract idea, or even just a list, like I love the idea of someone signing it, but all the ways that we can make what being on this board entails so much easier to understand, I think helps in the long run, but also makes it more equitable.
Yeah, Danielle, I was really actually happy that Lenore talked about that sort of that contract portion, that job description. I mean, it's something that I have installed in every one of our boards, because I do think, like you said, it's really important. Also, I was glad that, Katie, that you sort of pressed a little bit deeper on that financial commitment aspect, because I think like setting that base amount is really great for some organizations, but it does limit who can be on your board. And when you say like a meaningful financial gift, that changes everything. And so that's what I have done with our job description. So for instance, when I was at Quad City Arts, we had a really great board member who was 24 years old. And so when he gave $100, like that was a meaningful gift to him, because like that was a lot. We also had board members who were giving significantly more, but it was still like in that same meaningful era.
No, I'm glad, because this is the financial piece is something that I think about a lot, because I have been asked to sit on boards as well, that the financial commitment is well beyond what I could afford as a young professional. I've had to say no to those opportunities, but I think it's interesting. I've been moving around in the philanthropy space, and actually a presentation we had at the recent Michigan Presenters Conference was about sort of the philanthropic landscape for arts organizations. And the presenter talked about the 5 T's of giving, which is time, talent, treasure, ties, and testimony. So when we're thinking about boards and we're thinking about committee service, so yes, time, talent, treasure. So, but also ties and testimony. So the relationships that you have in the community that Lenore was talking about, and then that testimony, right? So being that advocate out in the community, being that liaison to other organizations, talking about the great work that is happening, those things are valuable as well. When we're looking to engage people in board or committee service, those things are also valuable. So I was glad we got to dig into that a little bit as well.
I want to talk about Lenore and how I have known Lenore throughout my time in the industry, which most of the time I didn't actually know her in person, but I saw her
I
in
think we're all on
professional
the edge of our
development
seats now.
Like all I did was I only saw her in professional development because she is constantly engaged in learning and professional development and bettering her skills and knowledge within the industry. And I respect her so much because I've seen her so much more in that realm than I have elsewhere in the industry. And I mean, I think a lot of that is just our paths hadn't crossed all that much outside of sitting in PD together. But I have so much respect for that reason because she's been in the industry and yet just continues to invest in learning more and advancing herself.
Yeah, Josh, and I just want to lift up my own experience with Lenore. She started the Presenters Leadership Consortium that she and Katie talked about in the interview, and that's how I met her. And I was connected with so many wonderful colleagues from across the country there. But she didn't just put us together in a room and then leave it at that. She actually fostered deep and sometimes difficult conversations. And that created, of course, lasting, meaningful relationships because we went so deep together. And those conversations have elevated so many great ideas and solutions as a result. And using the available technology of Zoom, she went from one meeting a year to monthly. And I know I'm not alone when I say I've gained so much from those meetings, and I'm so thankful for her leadership in doing that.
Yeah, and I think that's really evident in her thoughtfulness around technology and live streaming and engaging and bringing the arts to people in different ways and recognizing that technology is our friend and also our challenge at the same time.
Also, something else that stuck out to me is her talking about how bringing the Harlem Gospel Choir felt like something that was so outside of the box of something that she had normally booked that would maybe work in her venue, right? We all kind of get these ideas of like, oh, that fits in my venue or doesn't fit in my venue. And sometimes we box ourselves in, sometimes other people kind of box us in. So the thing that I always want to remember to come back to that she kind of said was like, they had these big signs in the hallway about the principles of their faith, right? And one of them is about opening doors. And I have a feeling almost every organization that's secular or not has a mission value statement that is something about opening doors to other people. I think whenever we have these conversations about does it fit, can we do it? And especially like with the community, right? If we get community feedback about like that doesn't fit here, we always have to keep remembering like the big picture of what it is we said that we're here to do. And maybe that wasn't for everybody there, but it was clearly for a lot of people because it sold out, right? And we don't know these things unless we do them. And, we also need to talk about how we're here to be opening doors and we're here to be making all these great strides in the community.
And I agree wholeheartedly that being open-minded to what can be in your venue and finding ways to experiment with new art and new acts. And from personal experience, you're going to have some giant failures there too. You will learn what your community won't support. Reggae happens to be something in my community that won't support within our stage on our venue. But that's, like I said, that's learned purely through failure.
It's not a failure because you learned something.
Aww.
Hey, there you go. There you go. The other thing I want to raise about my conversation with Lenore is, from a personal perspective, how many doors she has opened for me and how generous she has been with her time and knowledge and energy and providing opportunities for me to step up and be a part of larger conversations and put my skill set to use in various spaces. And I know from other colleagues in the industry that have worked with Lenore in similar ways, they will say the same thing about how generous she is in those ways. So I do think Lenore is an excellent example of that hand up, right? And opening doors and creating space for other people. She is so passionate about this idea of multi-generational leadership and sharing space and creating opportunities for those that are coming up while also honoring and respecting those who are still there and the wisdom that they bring. And so I think she strikes a wonderful balance there and is really thoughtful about those things. And so I want to thank Lenore for that, for everything she's done for not only me, but for other people in the industry in the same vein. So I think that is all we have time for today, friends. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of There's No Business Like. Thank you, Lenore, for joining us at WA for this conversation and for listening every week. She is truly our number one fan, and we appreciate all of your support and time. And we will join you next time here on There's No Business Like.
All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to There's No Business Like. Our producers and hosts are Brian Zelmer, Josh Benson, Kevin Maynard, Katie Miller, and me, Danielle Van Hook. views expressed in this podcast are ours alone and are not reflective of the organizations we are a part of. Keep up with us at nobusinesslife.com. There you'll find links to all of our episodes and socials. If you like this podcast, give us a like, a follow, a review, or our favorite, a 5-star rating. Oh wait, what was that site? I got it, don't worry. It is nobusinesslife.com. Do I sound out bus-I-ness every time I type it? Yep, sure do. Stay in touch, my friends.
I love how Danielle's answer was 100% like service to the industry, curating new works. Like, it was so good and rich, and the rest of us are like, I got all these commercial people that are super famous. Good job, Danielle.
Listen, I'm in my capitalism era. I can tell you about that later, but yeah, like I'm about to just like put money where it needs to go.